Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and I'm joined today by
Brendan Rorison, and we're recording live on Twitch at the same time again, Adam. So second episode in a row on that. And that's why I wanted to nail the transition from you introducing me, because we were getting some shit in the Discord about the fact there's a massive delay usually whenever I say my name. So I wanted to be a bit quick and on that. So yeah, but anyway, we're here to talk hot takes. It's 2023. What better things could we be doing right now?
Yeah, but hold up a second. I'm not aware of this delay. I didn't know there was a because peek behind the curtain. I will slightly tweak things by like milliseconds so that if there is any delay in the recording, it doesn't come out when we actually publish the episode. But I guess I'm not on top of my shit. I'm doing something wrong.
I do actually think it's just more on my side. Like, it's as if like I've got a vacant headspace or something. So when you say you're joined by, I usually take a bit longer than I probably should. So it's something only one or two people have pointed out, but it always makes me laugh when it comes up, because in my head I do feel as if it's that way, but I never consciously make an effort to change it. So yeah,
I think you're all good. I think you're good. If we were talking on top of each other, then you know, nothing would ever happen. It would just descend into chaos. So nothing wrong with taking a breath. But yeah, here we are. Hot Takes 2023. This was going to be the Christmas episode. It's not the Christmas episode, but instead we're doing it live. So yeah, but we got a ton of feedback, comments, everything from when you initially put out the request, which was way back in the beginning of November. And I was saying just before we went live, this is going to be the best hot takes ever, and that's because I'm noticing finally a distinct lack of Forza Horizon sucks takes. There are a couple in here, but like way less of an overall percentage than there were before. So people are finally coming at us with like takes about things that we haven't talked about before, which is nice.
Yeah, the Forza Horizon series is just such a magnet for this stuff for some reason. Like, it definitely feels like, with it being the kind of market leader at the moment, you could say, in terms of the popularity within industry, and I think it's also like an easy racing game to be referenced in like mainstream articles about, oh, here's the best racing games, and it's very easy to say Forza Horizon. So naturally I think a lot of people feel it kind of makes the genre seem a bit more standardized than it actually is. There's some really cool stuff out there that's a bit more niche and such, so I think that's why that typically dominates. But this is like the third time we've done this question on Twitter as well, so I think we have managed to ring the towel of Forza Horizon Despair out, and now everybody is going to be bringing us some different stuff. I mean, Adam, we were having a brief chat before we started recording, and there are some real deep cuts in here by the sounds of it, so
yeah, I think I kind of want to just get into it because I saw this one right before we went live, and I love it because it's going to piss everyone off, but I agree with it. All right, so Tessemi, Tessemi, they're going after the Golden Boy, I think, in Time Extend lore, which of course is Ridge Racer. They said that Ridge Racer celebrated itself to death. It refused to innovate on itself, and in the later years never added anything new. They only tried to nostalgia bait with their old games while never repeating the genius strategy of Ridge Racer Type 4, and now it's dead. Quality over speed. That is rough. I also want to add on to that one that really made me laugh, which is Mace saying, Ridge Racer 8 being cancelled was for the best because if it was bad, I would have killed someone.
Well, I mean, if this first hot take you mentioned says anything, then it probably would have been the exact same game as like the 4 or 5 that preceded it. So
yeah, and I guess right before we get into this one, I'll say, you know, hot takes. I know they're done to death. I know that we are all inundated with them on Twitter, but the reason why I actually like this episode is because we kind of take, you know, we won't pay any attention to ones that are complete bullshit, but we'll take decent points, or maybe not so decent points, whatever, just things that we see that are interesting, and just by talking about them, you kind of diffuse it. Like, I don't see anything wrong in that, and I think for as much as we like love and miss Ridge Racer, the reality is you look at it and like there was very little advancement between like 2004 and 2007 with that series. I mean, I guess 2012 if you're counting the Vita one, right? So I mean, it's a example of the market changing, because once upon a time Namco could spend all of its money on the new Ridge Racer, and that made perfect financial sense. And then all of a sudden, by the end of the 2000s, that wasn't feasible anymore. So like it's really no surprise it went the way that it did. I think I saw another hot take that was something to the effect of like Outrun 2 could never be done again because the indie dev crowd doesn't have the resources and the AAA devs don't want to invest in that anymore. And that's the exact same reason why you won't see like a game like Ridge Racer anymore. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of merit to that take.
Yeah, it's one of these ones, like, you first read it and you would say that it's a burning hot take. It's out there, especially just because of how much everybody loves Ridge Racer, but in actuality, I don't disagree with the underlying tone about the game being very... I mean, is it iterative's probably giving it too much credit in many capacities. They obviously introduce a few new tracks here and there and some cars and stuff, but they never really got over that whole drift and boost type gameplay and never tried to refresh it in any meaningful ways. You obviously had the different types of boost and that sort of thing, but nothing that really left a lasting impression, I would argue. And I am curious about the idea behind that being that the kind of the series celebrated itself to death, because I'm not even sure if it was Namco kind of bigging up their own series and making it as if it's fantastic and then not trying to improve it so much as it was just a kind of easy series for them to churn out over a good few consoles, and the gameplay loop was very steady, and there's a new HD console out, so why not basically kind of upscale the assets from Ridge Racer 2 and such and bring them over to the new console. It felt more like for quite some time Namco had the series sitting there in a condition that was great fun, looked pretty decent at the time, of course, and the game is very crisp looking regardless if it's PSP or through to the Vita. It's a very crisp looking game. I actually think it was more just and this is an issue I have with kind of Bandai Namco in general, it more felt as if the series was an easy thing they could churn out time after time. I never really got that feel from it that they were saying, look how fantastic what we've made is. I really do think it was more just they didn't actually want to kind of create a new game and be a bit more experimental with it. It just feels as if it was a series that got pretty stagnant as opposed to over-celebrated.
Yeah, I don't think it was hubris in the sense of being over-celebrated. I think they just realized that, you know, they kind of had this base and maybe didn't have the money or the time to invest in it like they used to, so they just kind of kept iterating on it. And, I mean, the other thing, too, is, like, Ridge Racer was always a tech showcase for Namco, and I'm not saying it didn't sell well, because I'm sure it sold very well in, like, the PS1 and maybe the early PS2 days, but, like, it was more of a place for Namco to say, hey, look what we can do. And they were like one of the most technically forward developers at the time. So, you know, you can do that with a racing game pretty easily. We've talked about this over and over again. We've spoken with John from Digital Foundry about it. And like, yeah, I mean, I remember him saying like, there's a reason you see racing games like early, like as launch titles and stuff like that, because it's a very good snapshot to give people of like, here's what the console can do, here's why you should buy this over the last one that you already own, and so on. So yeah, we'll keep talking about the death of Ridge Racer forever. I really do think one day it's gonna come back. How it comes back, I don't freaking know. But I feel like nothing is ever truly dead.
No, of course not. And I think as well, like, obviously the signs were pointing towards a Switch revival for so long. We've talked about that numerous times. And then, of course, we found out that maybe perhaps it was actually the PlayStation it was being built for instead. And maybe that means Namco see the merit in that type of technical showcase you're talking about. You're certainly not going to get that out of Nintendo hardware. So maybe they actually feel as if the future of the series is more in line with kind of being that type of showcase title again that they could really do with, to be honest. I mean, I know that they obviously have the kind of From Software published games, Bandai Namco, but outside of that and maybe Ace Combat, you could argue that they do kind of get by on those kind of bit part anime games they churn out quite a lot these days, so a little bit of variation would be good there. Obviously Tekken as well, sorry, Tekken. Yeah, I think Ridge Racer still has a place, and it would be great if we actually see it come back into the limelight.
Yeah, for sure. But we could talk about Ridge Racer all show, so do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. Just have a look to see what the best choice is here, because there's quite a lot, so I was wanting to kind of start with a pretty strong one. And yeah, this one's pretty good actually. We covered Need for Speed Underground last time, and we made references to Most Wanted and such, but Wes Jurica, and that's at Nike's Car, says that Need for Speed Most Wanted has an overly assisted, uninteresting handling model, not deserving of an arcade racer that gets the praise that it does, even if that praise is just nostalgia fueled. So, I mean, this is something that's kind of, you could say, you could leverage at most of the kind of black box Need for Speed titles off the bat, I would argue. I don't agree with it personally, but I think that this seems like a take more inspired by this idea that difficult equals good, even in arcade racing games. I feel as if the kind of Need for Speed titles from Underground, Most Wanted and such were great fun to play, and they didn't really need this insanely difficult handling model that needs you to get every inch of track to your kind of advantage. I feel as if the handling models in those games suit the type of game that it actually is.
Yeah, I think the use of the word overly assisted is interesting to me, because I feel like if you go back and you look at older arcade racing games, and they're talking about, I assume, the 2005 one here, so that's old enough. Like, it's not really overly assisted, it just has a lot of grip. Like, that's kind of it. It has a lot of grip. That game, the black box games, gave you a lot of grip, and there was a little bit of like skittishness or oversteer, but not really so much that you could carry a drift with, and those were very grip focused games. And with the Need for Speed fandom, there's always this like constant war between like brake to drift versus grip or whatever, and I find it incredibly stupid and annoying. But like I also think it's interesting too, because we put this out like a month before Unbound came out, and so I'm interested how people kind of compare Unbound in the lineage of Need for Speed handling, where they would rate that. But as it comes to 2005, yeah, the handling in that game, I don't think it's great, but I think it works. And ultimately, like, Need for Speed, I don't think has ever had a handling model. And I love like Hot Pursuit 2, which was the first black box game. I don't think that series has ever had a handling model where I'm like, yes, this feels physically perfect. It's more about like the situations you're in, the locales you're driving through, the cop chases, the sense of speed. It's not really about the physicality. I think the more that Need for Speed actually tries to be about that, the more it fails, because like the Ghost era and up till Unbound has just been all over the place for me personally. I can't stand the way Unbound handles, and I've said this on Twitter, and people yelled at me about it.
Yeah,
but
Twitter gamer, Adam.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Gus saying never found the NFS handling model good. That's again, I think the black box games. Yeah, it just works for what it is. I think what black box did, if you could say that they like failed or something, they erred on the side of caution to me, which is like in the city-based racing game, open world city-based racing game, you want the ability to make quick changes. You want the ability to just, especially if you're trying to like lose the cops or whatever, you want the ability to just like do a quick handbrake turn into like a 90-degree left or right intersection, whatever. And you can do that in Most Wanted 2005. So like maybe it's not that much fun, but it gives you all the tools you need to have a good time and be successful and play the game properly, and I think that's really all you can ask for.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it's one of these ones where I don't think a Need for Speed game is ever going to be purely defined by its physics model anyway, as long as what is there kind of goes in synchronization with what the game is trying to do from a gameplay design point of view and what the main objective of the game is, then it's going to be great fun. And for me, That's one of the reasons why, just because it's came up a few times, but the Unbound didn't get me on board because I felt as if I was constantly at odds with the actual driving experience itself, trying to find some fun as opposed to it just flowing naturally and feeling like a fun street racing experience. And to be honest, the older Need for Speed games were a lot better at getting that across without making it feel as if like it was this like incredibly, from a physicality point of view, incredibly in-depth racing game. I don't think every racing game needs to have that level of depth, and Need for Speed's definitely a series that thrives on that mainstream appeal. So personally, I disagreed with that hot take, and I decided to bring up another take that's on the screen, just looking back on it, that's pretty funny. But it was basically Need for Speed Unbound is likely to be an underdeveloped cringe fest, but we are so desperate for a new good Need for Speed that we just ignore that. Now, Adam, my question to you is, YouTube in 2025, when they do their natural retrospectives on Need for Speed Unbound, will this be the type of sentiment, or do you think this one's way off the mark?
I think people really want to love Unbound and want to forgive it, which is interesting to me because I kind of thought everybody was going to hate it just because it was a Need for Speed game, and the last, 4 have been varying points of okay, bad, good, but not good enough. I don't know. It just seems like it's impossible for Criterion, Ghost, whoever is at EA, to please people. But yeah, I don't know. I would certainly not call the game an underdeveloped cringe fest. I think for all of my complaining, I like the game. I've put a lot of hours into the game. It's a good game, and it's, I have issues with it, but like there's aspects. It's like we talk about a lot with, games like the 7 out of 10 racers, your Auto Modelistas and stuff like that. It's like, even if they have problems, there is a nugget here that's like, no one else is doing this. This is really cool. And I feel that a lot with Need for Speed Unbound. So how YouTube will look back on in 2025, I don't know. I feel like people forget they played it more than anything else. But I hope that the next Need for Speed, whatever it is, kind of takes more risks than Unbound took, because for me, it just felt like Heat with the furniture rearranged in a way that was honestly pretty frustrating. But that's
No, I'd agree with that. I just had such a strange sense of deja vu in the first few hours of the game, and I mean, we are two people who really enjoyed Heat, you especially, and you've kind of advocated for it a good few times, so I can see why it'd be kind of hard to get into. But regardless, you've been playing a ton of it anyway, and people are enjoying it at the moment. But like all things, time kind of gives a bit of clarity, and it'll be interesting to see what people think about it in retrospect, because maybe it is just kind of what the Need for Speed series needed, a little kind of steady the ship type game, build upon what was there to a relative extent before maybe going down a different route, who knows, like a Hot Pursuit 2 type thing in terms of another kind of reboot of that, or who knows what route they'll go down with Need for Speed. But yeah, I think this one, a bit off the mark. Underdeveloped cringe fest is an...
Well, that's just the way that people are going to talk, you can't go. I am genuinely, I said it, and for all of my complaints with the game, I am genuinely happy that the game was received as well as it was, and that like Criterion's back in the saddle and got that, kind of sense of like goodwill from everybody about it. I think that's good. So yeah, here's to more things, better things, continuing things with Need for Speed in the future.
Absolutely. So what's your next take, mate? Have you identified another one?
Yeah. I want to know what you have to think about this. I feel like you might agree with it. Mario Kart. Well, first of all, from Darth Feo. Thanks for chiming in. Mario Kart 8 had the best original score for a racing game in the 2010s. I doubt this could be a hot take, but people barely talk about the soundtrack, and that game handles music better than 90% of racers that came out in the last decade, from the production to performances themselves. I think you gotta give it to Mario Kart 8. I mean, really, we don't talk about it because it's like Mario Kart, and it's more of a genre thing, not a quality of the game thing or anything like that. But hey, they throw a full band at that game. You can't You can't fuck with that. Nobody is executing on the level that Nintendo is.
So I think, like, for the purposes of being as transparent as possible, I'll base my thoughts on this on Mario Kart 8 with DLC on the Wii U, because right now Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with the mobile course pack stuff going on just now means the overall quality of that game has dipped in terms of like the musical scores and stuff, since they don't use the real band anymore for like those new tracks and such. So we'll say Mario Kart 8 as complete on the Wii U. And I do actually agree with that quite a lot, because like you're saying, that they've got a real band actually kind of composing the songs. They've got that kind of full live recordings type thing going on, and it really makes for a fantastic experience. And in general, Mario Kart 8, I think a lot of people like underplaying just how good that game is in terms of a game design perspective, the actual art style itself, the music, and the actual gameplay loop. Because I think I've said before on the podcast, I'm not a massive Mario Kart or Nintendo Mario stuff in general fan. I'm very much somebody who really loves DS. I really love the Wii one, and then 8 Deluxe for me is pretty much the best kart racer of all time, which is probably a hot take in itself for some people. But speaking specifically on the music side of things, I think it's just an absolute thrill ride of like musical expertise from like Nintendo when they were really going for that big band type feel. I think there's like Mario 3D World as well that's got like this exact same band composing the music there. And the best thing about the soundtrack is that there's just such variation because of all the different type of track environments, all of that sort of thing. And if we're talking about original soundtracks anyway, I mean, how many games is it probably up against there when you're thinking about kind of original compositions? So maybe that's what makes it not so much of a hot take. It's not really up against much of anything at all. Well, there's obviously...
I mean, you could look at like the 2010s, because that's what they're saying. So over the last decade, there have been some games, you know, like Drive Club had some original music, stuff like that. You know, maybe some Codemasters games might have had some original music. But yeah, I mean, but Nintendo can do that. You know, they can throw all of their weight at the soundtrack like that, and no one else is really going to invest in that way, and nobody else is making like a kart racer, so they're probably not gonna. You know, for a kart racer, you'll have original music, whereas like you probably wouldn't have that for like a normal racing game these days. It would tend to be more licensed. So yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a hot take, I guess, in the sense that in the racing space, especially, like Mario Kart doesn't really get discussed that much. In favour of more kind of underplayed kart racers, such as, I guess actually now I think about it, it's probably next main competitor would be Sonic Transformed, I guess, because like obviously that's all kind of original compositions and stuff, remixes of songs, and you got Richard Jack kind of doing the main remixes there. I guess the only thing about that soundtrack is that it aged a bit with the kind of dubstep focus, you could argue. I guess it's not going to age as gracefully as like the Mario Kart tunes, but at the same time that had a very specific style that was very nice. But I would probably say that it's definitely a contender. I would need to actually think about what came out in the 2010s in terms of original compositions and stuff. I don't want to say for sure that it is the absolute best, but one thing I do know is that every single piece of music in that game is so meticulously crafted that you can't knock it. And it's like you were saying, Adam, like Nintendo throw as much budget as required into a game like this because it's such a common staple within that subgenre of racing game. And that's just, for me, like Mario Kart 8 just feels like the most complete package because of that, which includes the music. So,
I mean, to this day, somehow Nintendo is able to find people who own Switches that don't have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And that just every year they find more, and it doesn't make any sense. So they're definitely getting the return on their investment. I do want to mention that we have Tin in the chat, and because I actually just saw their comment, their hot take. They said that the Sonic Robo Blast 2 kart is the best kart racer ever made. I have never heard of this before.
No, me either. I'm actually Googling it right now to get an idea. I think I've seen Tin talk about it before in the Discord, actually, or maybe even maybe in some of the GT Thursday sessions, but I will be brutally honest, I've never actually played this. It says it's got features over 100 maps, 2 game modes.
So the wiki says it is a modification, so it is originally based on the Mario Kart mode of SRB2 Riders. Now, SRB2 Riders is another. This is like the Sonic like fan dev community. Like, props to them, but I cannot for the life of me follow anything that they ever do. Like, it's just like it replicates the gameplay and levels of Sonic Riders. Okay, so it looks like a pseudo like a low poly or like a 3D sprite or a 2D sprite scaler kind of Sonic Riders game. But I don't know, the Robo mod might be different. I don't know, but
there's a shit ton of characters in this game, by the way. I'm just looking and like I'm seeing like Kirby, I'm seeing Blaze the Cat, I'm seeing some characters from Freedom Planet as well, which is another. I think it started off life as like a Sonic fan game, but did come out as a full-fledged release. There's Isabelle from Animal Crossing, because of course. There's a Metal Slug in there as well, so it certainly looks like something.
One thing I thought was really cool was that at the last Sonic Game Jam or Sonic Game Expo or whatever they call it, the guy making Overjump, the Sega Rally Reborn in UE5 was there, and that's cool. I like that game got a lot of attention, and there was a demo that came out, like kind of a little snippet last year that I was fooling around with, and it's still very rough, but like it looks amazing, and I love that somebody's trying, so that'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like the sad reality is when you hear about projects like this and you see images of, oh, here's what it could look like, you just kind of now automatically assume it might not see the light of day, and there might be too many challenges to get it in a playable state, let alone a full release. And it was a great thing to see when that demo actually released. Even like you're saying, if there's some kind of rough around the edges parts, I think the requirements to play it were pretty high as well.
And I think exactly. He also said that he doesn't have like he obviously has like development experience, but I don't think like game development experience. Like, he's never made a game before, so like I think so. Yeah, I mean, super impressive from that perspective. And he has the right sort of mindset about it, which is like he wants to make a game with 3 tracks and 2 cars. Like, that's it. That's an achievable goal. You know, it's like, it's not like when they announced what ended up being Hot Shot Racing, and at first they announced a game, then they were like, we want to have like the destruction mode and all this other stuff. And then the game got like so big that it was just, by the time it came out, it was like, I don't even know what I'm looking at anymore. Yeah, so anyway. All right. What is next?
So, I've chosen one. Like we always do focus on the arcade racers pretty much here, and I always feel as if we should throw at least one sim-related one in, since like it does have the lion's share now, you would argue, in terms of like gamer mind space, that sort of thing. We obviously... It won't be a genre in a few years when Ian Bell takes over the full thing with his new fantasy project.
GTR revival.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like he was talking about the game recently, actually, and this is why this take stood out to me, because it kind of ties into what he was saying about what people were giving him feedback on, about his fantasy game and all that sort of thing. And this person here says basically that the vast majority of racing games, or sims to be specific, that focus on GT3, Formula 1, other purpose-built race cars are phenomenally boring. Seeing production cars, stock and tuned, rip around racetracks are and forever will be more interesting to play as in racing games. Shout out to Gran Turismo. So, I at first didn't think this really qualified as a hot take, because I think everybody wants variation, right? Like, that's kind of, you want a nice balance of different things. If you think about TOCA back in the day, you didn't just have the touring cars, the British touring cars, you also had like the Ford Ka Cup cars and the Formula Renaults, I think, at some point might have made it, or something like that. There's always been that kind of need to diversify and provide multiple different cars, that sort of thing. Gran Turismo, Forza Motorsport, definitely the best experience of trying to replicate that, and Forza Horizon 2 on the more arcade side of things. But I do think in the sim space specifically just now, there is very much a focus on replicating one specific spec series or series to the nth degree over providing a more varied experience. So I think it qualifies as a hot take because I think the way development is shifting within the genre is to focus on specific disciplines, but I feel as if there is actually something to be said for still trying to capture that more varied experience. Even if the main focus of your game is GT3, should you be really throwing away all the kind of production car-led kind of sim stuff and everything done, say for example, Competizione compared to Base Assetto Corsa? What do you think here, Adam? Do you feel as if like this focus on very specific series racing is better, or do you think we really do need to actually see a bit more variation here?
I think the problem is like inherently if you have like a game based on F1 or sports car racing or whatever, like it's not going to have the variation that you want. If you like a game like Gran Turismo, having that sort of, or like Need for Speed or whatever, having that ability to customize your car for to, you know, and kind of chart your own course, it's going to be more rigid and boxed in. But to me, the way that you make up for that is by fleshing out the career. And this is always like why I go back to like a game like Dirt 4 versus a game like Dirt Rally or Dirt Rally 2.0. It's like, or WRC Generations versus like Dirt Rally. It's like you can build in some of that autonomy and some of that sense of purpose and challenge from all of like the non-race aspects of the game by like making the career a little bit more interesting, kind of, and it's not like rocket science to do that. I actually think like the F1 games, I've kind of fallen out of them, but I've also kind of fallen out of F1 too. But I think the F1 games have done a good job of like really fleshing out the career mode, the managerial aspects. I don't hate the skill tree. I know some people get bored of that, but I actually kind of love it. It's like just a button, like an itch to kind of scratch that just makes me feel like I'm progressing and bettering my team and my vehicle and stuff like that. Sponsors, you know, all of that stuff. I think that's kind of how you do it. Anyone who can come up with like more interesting ways to do that, sure. I think it is asking developers too much to be like it's asking Kunos a lot to be like, we're going to be the GT3 game with all the GT3 cars, the official licenses, the official tracks, a series of Blancpain, whatever, everything. But we're also going to get like licenses for road cars, and like that's a lot. That's a lot in these days. You kind of have to do either or. You can dip your toes into some of the officially licensed stuff, but it's a challenge. It also costs a lot of money. So I think if you're making a game like a WRC, GT3, F1, whatever, like you have to kind of try to build that in back with the career. And I think it's a little more like Project Cars, I remember in the beginning was like, oh, how we'll do that is like we'll have the driver journey where you start out in a kart and then eventually one day maybe you'll end up in fake F1. But it's like that takes a year. You know, like maybe I don't want to spend like 10 hours racing karts, because the thing is like, you know, you're going to be driving the same car, you're going to be doing a lot of repetitive sessions, so you need other different ways. And it doesn't even maybe necessarily have to be a challenge. Like, I'm really excited to dig back into CMR3 because Silent has been talking a lot about like modifying that game and patching it for PC and stuff. And CMR3 is one of those games that didn't have a lot of content, but it made you feel so like immersed in the environment with like the active service parks and stuff like that. I think those things go a long way when it comes to like a licensed motorsport racing game. So yeah, I think you just have to be more creative with it if you're making a game like that. Yeah,
I think that is fair. Right? The kind of ballooning costs of game development across the board right now speak for themselves, and especially in a marketplace where if you're marketing yourself as a sim, there is already a target on your back in terms of how you're replicating that motorsport. Are you doing it better than other titles? That sort of thing. I guess the irony there is that these type of judgments mostly come from people who've never driven such cars, but the argument is still there that if you drive an Audi R8 in one game and it doesn't handle the way that it is in the other 6, then you'll be kind of assumed to be the one in the wrong. So I imagine a lot of effort goes into the kind of small amount of cars, making sure that they actually kind of get replicated correctly. But at the same time, I do think there is a trend at the moment where basically every single series kind of wants its own definitive sim, and they want to be a full priced sim at that. I just wonder how many people actually care enough about driving GT3s to that level of quality, for example, or any series really. And obviously, of course, Competizione has been a great success, but in terms of all those other series that are maybe looking at it, and just looking at the chat as well, William was saying about like the World of Outlaws game, for example, being a really cool example of a specific motorsport being represented to the nth degree with high kind of levels of accuracy, that sort of thing. But is it really the type of game that a lot of people will actually be able to kind of justify paying the money for, given the amount of effort that goes into creating that type of game? There is a challenge there, I think, in terms of the balance. And like when we were talking about GTR 3 Revival just before this hot take, that was, like I said, it was some tweets from Ian Bell that made this one stand out to me, where basically he'd obviously said when he kind of first pitched this, the elevator pitch via Twitter, in terms of it's all the hardcore sim you can want for this series, that sort of thing. And then like a few weeks down the line, he was actually like, well, you know what, if we could include production cars, what production cars would you like? So I feel as if like you can say what you want about how the Project Cars series turned out, but I do think in terms of what he done at Slightly Mad Studios and the team done there, they kind of had a good grasp on what could actually be successful. So that little bit of diversification beyond the main objective of the game can be good, but obviously you don't want to detract from the main vision of what's trying to be created. So I do think the point about the career mode is good, because that's typically where you can get a bit more mileage out of your title and maybe take attention away from the on-track action enough to make it feel unique. It's just a hard balance to get right. But if it's just a straight-up sim replicating a specific style of motorsport, it's going to be for you or it isn't. Like, if you're really not that interested in driving those types of cars in a realistic manner, then of course it's going to be boring. But at the same time, I think the Formula 1 series' recent successes have proven that there are stuff you can offer above and beyond the driving experience, and that doesn't necessarily come in the form of allowing you to drive other classes of car, that sort of thing. I'm not doubting that people drive the Formula 2 cars and the supercars and the newest ones, but I do think the career mode additions have made a much larger impact in terms of keeping things exciting. So part of me feels like this hot take can actually be kind of lessened if you look at it through the lens of, is it the actual game design it's failing rather than the representation of driving a specific class of vehicle?
Yeah, and we also have to consider that like these are more often than not annual games. If you're talking about something that's made based on a particular kind of series, and like that's going to ultimately like sort of pigeonhole you in terms of being able to evolve. Your iteration's going to come a lot slower. So, yeah, that's the nature of the beast. Yeah, I've missed a lot with Ian Bell's Twitter account, and I like that he is doing, and I actually don't mean this in a terrible way. It's going to sound terrible at first. He's kind of doing the Elon thing where he's asking everybody what they want him to do. Unlike Elon, I actually think Ian Bell is going to do some of the things he said. Like, he says he'll put, licensed cars, road cars in the game that he finds interesting. So he'll probably do that. It's not like the fake choice that you get from the guy who's running Twitter right now. But yeah, that'll be one to watch for sure. Anyway, so we just talked about kart racers, but we've never talked about this one, and I think we should mention this, especially because it comes from a very important person. So Dodge Lamb, who you may know as Daniel Solis, GT World Series driver, said that Diddy Kong Racing was a million times better than any Mario Kart game could ever wish to be. Now, Daniel did not sort of expound upon this in a way where we really understand why Diddy Kong Racing is so much better than Mario Kart. I would imagine it's because of like the overworld and the various environments are all kind of linked together, and the challenges in the game, and having a pseudo open world design. And it's something that people love about Crash Team Racing too. I get where they're coming from if you're not talking about like the driving, you know, because I think in terms of the driving, like we've talked about Mario Kart 8 Deluxe a lot. You kind of have to give it to that. Maybe Sonic All Stars Racing Transform, but Mario Kart 8's pretty perfect. It's more about the everything else, and the everything else is very important. But yeah, so they also I should say they also say. Although I disagree, Crash Team Racing is legendary in its own right. Super valid opinion. My issue with Crash Team Racing is that I just kind of hate Crash Bandicoot, so that off the bat just kind of completely disqualifies that game.
Yeah.
But yeah, some kinds of like kart racers that you don't really see made anymore. I mean, kart racers in general are definitely not what they were at their height. I mean, I don't think anyone really wants to even bother trying to compete with Mario Kart anymore, except for maybe Sega every like 5 years. But no one's doing like the overworld thing, you know, no one's doing, and I think that's kind of interesting because like you have like Nitro Fueled, right? But like every now and then, like somebody will be like, oh, we're going to make like a Mario Golf clone. Like we're going to make some sort of like light sports simulation, but really it's going to have like some sort of like story mode in the middle. And nobody does that anymore. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I always wonder if it's like the overworld side of things is more of a technical limitations being broke down. So it's like back in the day to kind of create that feel of a larger game with more in it. It was a good way of kind of emulating that pseudo open world type experience. Whereas I feel as if nowadays, for some reason, like if somebody were to make a game with that type of setup, it would probably be slated for not just being like a kind of fully open world type racer game, if that makes sense, in terms of like a kart racer trying to emulate that experience, because it was definitely a type of concept you would imagine that was made from kind of technical limitations. I think if anybody can create something that truly feels open and easily approachable, they'll make that. But it definitely feels like just generally across the board you don't really see that anymore, because if you even consider like Mario 64, the kind of Peach's Castle and all of that sort of thing for getting into levels, the newer Mario games don't do anything like that. Really, it's more kind of like just a top-down map, go into the level, take it from there, and yeah, it just feels like kind of a game concept that isn't really looked at anymore. And on the kind of the point about the main point being about Diddy Kong being better than Mario Kart, I do think like it's this classic thing of Mario Kart tries to do the absolute bare minimum as far as a kart racer is concerned and doesn't really stray out of its lane. So naturally, whenever any pretenders or competitors come for the throne, what they do is kind of expand it out to the nth degree. If you think about Sonic Transformed, it's the very meaty kind of campaign mode with loads of different game modes, loads of different speed classes, all that sort of thing. Diddy Kong Racing at the time took the approach of that more kind of classic Rare story, lore-based world with a bit more behind it. But I just feel as if when you're playing a kart racer and you're sticking on a kart racer for a few games, a few races, like Mario Kart still beats it out. I understand the kind of the scope and what they were going for is much larger. Crash Team Racing, the main plus point people say about that game is how it's kind of more geared towards competitive play or sweaty type play, in terms of if you're good at Crash Team Racing, you will not lose to somebody who's worse. I think that kind of detracts from what a kart racer is supposed to be in a way. I get it. I love Crash Team Racing. I do, but like I've got a mate, and like anytime Crash Team Racing comes out, it's just like it feels like you're versing like somebody who plays like iRacing compared to you playing fucking Gran Turismo or something like that, in terms of there's just no competition there. If you're really good at that game, you will always beat people who aren't as good. And I don't know, I feel as if a kart racer is supposed to be a party game in the first place. It's supposed to replicate the madness of racing where anything can happen, and for that reason that's why I still think Mario Kart comes out on top of CTR as well. But compared to Diddy Kong Racing, I really appreciate what it went for. I love the kind of the environments, I love the tracks, that sort of thing. But I really feel as if are you being honest, are you ever going to take out Diddy Kong Racing over Mario Kart when you fancy a kart racer with a few friends? I can't really see it, but you know what, it's it's a world of opinions, so maybe that's just my perspective.
I do want to revisit the game. I mean, like, it's very single player focused. It can do the multiplayer thing, but it's very single player focused, and I think it kind of lands in the same domain as, not coincidentally, a game like Ukulele or something that, like, nobody's gonna, like, no, like, AAA developer is gonna make that today, but, like, I could see, like, whoever from Rare, like, ran things and, you know, was, like, the lead on Diddy Kong Racing, being like, we're gonna make a spiritual successor to Diddy Kong Racing, and then they announce on Kickstarter, and then 7 years later it comes out and it's okay. Like, I feel like Diddy Kong Racing is one of those games. So, yeah, I can understand it. I do honestly feel bad for, like, every developer that tries to go up against Mario Kart, does all of these interesting and new things, and then just gets completely slaughtered in terms of sales. It's like it and it's not that Mario Kart's like a worse game, because we're talking about all of the reasons that we like it and think that, like, it achieves that balance of skill but also ultimately being fun for everybody, which is what Kart Racer is supposed to be. Mario Kart does that the best. But I do feel bad when, like, you look at all of the work that was put into a game like Sonic Transformed and the depth of that career mode and everything, and it's just like, I mean, I think it did well, but, like, they haven't made, you know, the next kart racer they made after that was, like, massively scaled back. So I think that pretty much tells us everything that you need to know.
Yeah, exactly. The less said about that downgrade, the better in many ways.
All right, so I got one here, and this might be a good reflective one to end on. So Sad Arc said, once we hit the Xbox One generation of games, every racing game has become the most reductive version of itself in the genre. I don't know if I completely disagree with that, because I think if you can look at series sort of where they were before that generation and where they were, like, after the Xbox One and PS4, like, you saw a lot of series kind of that maybe were more ambitious before just sort of take a step back. I mean, like, you look at, like, and there might be varying reasons for that. It might probably has something to do that, like, in years like 2007, 2008, maybe like 2010, like, that was probably the end, or whatever year Blur and Split Second came out was probably, like, the last year that, like, there was a big explosion of, like, racing games that were diverse. And that was kind of right at the tail end of that generation, because after that, things kind of slowed down. Codemasters went through something where they were releasing so many games at the end of that 360 PS3 generation, and then all of a sudden things just kind of ground to a halt. You didn't see Dirt for a while. You didn't see Grid for a while. It was a weird time. So, but in terms of being reductive, like, you know, it was interesting with, like, Ken Block passing away. I recently took a dive back into Dirt 2 for a stream that Jalopnik just did. And, like, yeah, I forgot kind of how ambitious that game was and the sense of purpose it had, and Dirt 3 as well. And it gets kind of lost, but, like, Dirt 3 had, like, a ton of content. So, yeah, I kind of look back and I think that for whatever reason, budgetary or otherwise, like, the big dreams kind of got downscaled in size entering, like, the middle of the 2010s. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I could see that.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, we talk about that point in time where Split Second, Blur, Mod Nation all released within a very short time window, and I think there's a reason we always come back to that point, because it is kind of where the most creative racing games, or the last creative racing games we ever got, kind of happened. And the issue that kind of plagues all type of creative endeavours, in my opinion, is when a clear blueprint for success appears, or in the case of the racing genre, two clear blueprints for success appear. Because Gran Turismo set the tone very, very early on, the PlayStation era, but it's an expensive game to make, which means the vast majority of developers can get close to creating something like that. So everybody tries their own spin on things. They introduce new, unique ways of playing a racing game that you might not see elsewhere. Everybody tries doing that. But then I feel as if kind of like we're saying, towards the end of the Xbox One era, there was definitely that divergence of sim racers want very specific, meticulous sim racing experiences, and Forza Horizon is the blueprint from now on for all arcade racers, and we'll kind of diverge off of that slightly, but that is where the kind of level of success is. And I think since then, especially with how important player retention numbers are these days, and basically having word of mouth almost appears more important than actual sales a lot of the time as well. I do think that many racing games that come out now basically exist to try and have that kind of FOMO recurring theme of, here's new cars being dropped, why don't you drive these, here's kind of constant updates, and it's more about a content war as opposed to the actual kind of gameplay and underlying experience regarding that. So if you were to ask somebody, I guess, what the kind of key unique selling point of any racing game in the past 5-10 years is, that you cannot find elsewhere, then it would be very difficult. It's not as easy as saying, well, split seconds about blowing buildings up and trying to kind of crush your opponents in a TV show. Blur, it's obviously a very realistic kart racer with full licensing, very kind of underground vibe, that sort of thing. Even if you talk about kart racers, which are the kind of most generic kind of cookie cutter type racing games you can get, you could still say with Mod Nation that it was very much a build your own kart racer within this kart racer. Now it's more like I've talked before about why I didn't get on with Dirt 5, and for me it was more that idea that I just felt as if it drew the line at, this is an arcade racer. There aren't many of those anymore. Like, for me, that was the issue I had with that game, where it was like, I'm glad that you're an arcade racer, but you're not really doing anything different or unique. Well, I guess that's the issue for me. It's like, it's great seeing a modern game kind of designed around the arcade racing principles that we often cherish and big up for older games, but then I'm directly comparing you against similar types of experience like that, like Dirt 3, like Dirt 2, and
right.
I would still rather play those ones. And I've said before a few times, I'm not somebody who goes back and plays old games all the time. Ideally, I want to find modern games that scratch the right itches. But the Dirt 5 point for me was more like, that was a case of suddenly just being an arcade racing game was the selling point, and it really came across that way to me, and outside of that it didn't really have its own identity. And I think a lot of racing games, like Grid Legends is a good example, I guess, of something that tried to iterate upon the original motif the game had of the underlying villainy of Raven West and all that sort of stuff. It's not made abundantly clear, but in Legends they actually played that up. They almost kind of, they adapted what the community mindset towards that game was and put it into a title, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So at least that had something there.
Right.
But it just feels as if for a lot of games now, it's more like, here's yet another rallycross rally game with the same cars you've used a million times. Maybe some unique kind of original courses if you're lucky, but most of the time you're just getting that kind of generic experience over and over again. And it's not to say they aren't fun, it's just that they're just like that reductive point we're talking about now. We are at that point where we're almost surprised when something does actually have a unique feel in the racing genre, and I feel as if it's not something that will resolve itself in the near future either.
Yeah, I mean, Dirt 5 felt like a very bare-bones game. I liked it. That's one of those few games that we really disagreed on. Like, I actually, I thought it was a lot of fun. I think that a lot, for me, a lot of that has to do with, like, whatever the secret sauce was that, like, Cody's Evo had in their engine was just, like, I loved it in every single game. Drive Club, Onrush, and Dirt 5. Like, they all just, those games are beautiful, and I'm going to really miss that technology. But yeah, if you go back to a game like Dirt 3, it definitely feels lighter. It feels like a launch title, in that, like, well, we couldn't do all of the things we did before, so we're just going to try and take what little content we have and execute it with the most quality, which I respect. But the thing is, it wasn't really, like, it was on the cusp of, like, the new gen, but, like, given the way game development is now, you don't really have to do that anymore. Games scale across generations, so there's no reason that Dirt 5 couldn't have been a bigger game than it was. And it just, I remember it being a little bit sort of, I mean, I really liked it, but I remember kind of being at odds with myself about it, because it was like, this game takes zero, like it does nothing new. There is absolutely nothing new happening here, but I like what they did. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, we go back and we look at games like, I don't know, like the original Colin McRae series, and just the wealth of content that game had, and how long it took like Dirt Rally to kind of get to that level 2, and even then it's kind of missing like sort of the personality that like the CMR series had, you know. So I think that there's a lot of there are a lot of examples that you can pull on that will validate the feeling that like these racing games have kind of stopped dreaming big. At the same time, you know, look at Need for Speed Unbound. Like Need for Speed Unbound, for better or for worse, has a lot of shit going on that like I don't remember seeing in like Need for Speed Rivals or even like Most Wanted 2012, which like, while I mean that's another game where we disagree, but like that game was infamously sort of kneecapped from what they wanted it to be. It ended up kind of coming out in sort of like a half formed state where it was like, well, let's just get the city and the cars working, and that's it. But they wanted a story in that game. They wanted a bunch of things, and they couldn't execute it. So I think it depends on where you're pulling your examples. The reality here is, for all of these hot takes, you're never going to find one that's entirely true. But I think that in terms of hitting hitting yourself on sort of a feeling, I agree with this one.
Yeah, and I don't really know how you come out of that cycle either, because I think especially in the instant feedback age we live in of Twitter and that sort of thing, like, you've seen it when Unbound got officially unveiled, like just mass hysteria about something that had some RGB colours and stuff in it instead of like just a grayscale city. There's definitely that worry now that anything that does kind of step outside the comfort zone of what people expect will be met badly, and I think that's the kind of the behind the scene forces of trying to launch a new IP or piggybacking off of one that already makes money will always be a challenge now, especially in the heightened cost of game dev and that sort of thing, because there could be a really cool experience that's an offshoot from Need for Speed, but it'll always be called a Need for Speed game now. I feel like I don't think we'll see that many AAA by racing game standards new IPs that emerge, unless it's like a new motorsport game by like Codemasters, WRC, that sort of thing. I think a lot of racing games now actually get sold on the basis of their legacy as opposed to what they want to trailblaze into the future, and I don't blame any parties for that. That's just the kind of harsh nature of the current games industry, isn't it? I guess it's a very difficult place to find an actual niche for yourself in, and if you cut all ties with the series that kind of birthed this game, it may have started under an existing IP and it turns into its own thing. I feel as if there is that kind of worry that if you decide to totally isolate from that IP that it was birthed from, that you could be letting the game release into no hype, anticlimactic kind of scenario, that sort of thing. And I don't really know how you fix that, really, unless you've got an absolutely stellar introduction. You could argue Onrush actually had a strong intro in terms of like that first trailer. Yeah. I think that kind of really surprised people, but it was because they thought it was MotorStorm, and that was the issue. As soon as like Rushy and co kind of elaborated that it wasn't that, the perception just flipped immediately, and that game was destined to fail. So it's a very fickle environment that games release into now, and hell, Fortnite was branded a PUBG clone for like the first few months of its release, and now find me 10 people you know that play PUBG. That's it's funny. It's just the way it goes in the games industry. It's so crazy. It's so fast paced, and you can get left in the dust. And I think especially in a niche industry like the racing game genre specifically, it is very hard to make a mark for yourself.
Yeah, isn't it always? Gus saying general trend with industries and media and arts where legacy IPs get made and remade, but new original stuff is impossible to get out the door. I mean, Look at every superhero movie.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, that basically tells you everything you need to know. It happens across all media. So, but yeah, this is probably a good time to wrap up. But lots of interesting takes here. I like that we talked a lot about like kart racers, which is something that we don't really ever focus on.
Yeah, not at all.
We were chatting about our next episode that we're going to discuss Rally Day Africa and Rally Day Europe, which I'm looking forward to. And it was actually funny because I saw that you tweeted that out. It actually got like 150 likes. And I was like, I didn't know that many people knew these games existed. So that's very cool. Yeah, what fun, weird little games. But that'll give us a lot to talk about. And then... it'll probably be the one after that, but down the line we were thinking again. Unfortunately with losing Ken Block this past week, digging back into Dirt and realizing that we never talked about Dirt. We did the podcast a couple years ago about Grid 1 and 2, but we didn't discuss Dirt. And I think like as far as I'm thinking about Dirt, I'm really concentrating on 1 through 3 because I feel like everything kind of after that is something else. Something worth talking about, but maybe like it's too recent, and when I think of Dirt, I think of those first 3 games. So that'll make for a good discussion for sure.
And you also kind of intrinsically tie, well, especially 2 and 3 to Ken Block, in terms of his influence and stuff. And it's almost like obviously the first Dirt game, Colin McRae, Dirt over here, and then just Dirt 2 and Dirt 3 everywhere in the world. Colin McRae name was dropped, but you do, like, in your head, like, you intrinsically tie those games to Ken Block, and it's like Ken Block's Dirt 2 and Dirt 3 wouldn't have been too outlandish to consider. Obviously, it never branded as such, but those definitely feel like the games that, for me, really put him on the map alongside the Gymkhana videos and those sort of things, and it's definitely something that it is long time due, and it's, I guess, the best way through time extent we can kind of pay tribute to his impact on motorsport and games in general, because like he was an absolute titan in that regard. And I said as much in my initial reaction to it, but I don't think there is many people in motorsport who really transcended that driver caricature and actually emerged into something a lot more greater, and whether that be through DC shoes, all those Gymkhana videos, the Hoonigan kind of fandom and which followed. He definitely left his mark on the video game side of things, and I think the Dirt trilogy is the best way for us to honour that.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many great kind of eulogies that have come up about him from all corners of the internet. But Tim Stevens wrote a really good one for The Verge. He's just like, there's no way that you're not a fan of something Ken Block did. Like, if you don't like cars, but you were on YouTube in 2009, you're a fan of Ken Block. It's just like I never appreciated the way in which he sort of like the shrewd, like, sort of marketing aspect of him, which I know is like shrewd marketer is never like a nice way to describe somebody, but like he was very smart, like smarter than anybody else, in seeing the potential there. And of course he was a really nice guy, so it was totally fine. But yeah, I mean, that's Dirt is obviously how he made his mark with us, and just because we could just go into talking about this before we record our episode about it, but real quick, playing Dirt 2, I just like sort of very quickly perusing the Wikipedia page, I didn't realize that like he was a consultant on the game, but particularly with the driving physics, he I guess requested the Codemasters just like give the cars more grip. And you don't, if you haven't played Dirt 1 and 2 in a long time and you have the ability to, I strongly recommend that you do, because I forgot how absolutely abysmally Dirt 1 handled and how perfectly Dirt 2 handles. It really is like, in terms of physics and handling, it really is one of the most like profound glow ups that I think like I've ever seen in racing games. And Ken Block had a part in that, so I think that alone is really, really cool. But there's definitely more to talk about there, so that'll be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree on that, and it's like everybody saying in the chat as well. It was such a shock, such a a terrible occurrence for this to happen. But if anything, it's sad it always goes this way, but death often makes you realise just how important some people were. And I was heavy into motorsport racing games growing up and such, but Ken Block's reach was that far that it was somebody totally not even into motorsports who first showed me a video involving him, and the rest is history from there. So yeah. I think that the kind of many lives he touched through that, and the fact that various people I know who have no interest in what like kind of Hoonigan was doing at the time now, or racing in general, still reached out and said, did you see that the guy who did the Gymkhana videos died? Like, I think his footprint from a motorsport that isn't Formula 1 is something only a select few like Colin McRae can ever say they had, and I think that's the silver lining here, is that it's made us realise just how important he was to motorsport, to racing video games as well, and just pretty much extreme sports as well.
Yeah. Now I just want to talk about Ken Block. But yeah, so I guess I'll pretty much do it for this episode. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Fun to do these live ones when we have the chance, and I think we'll be doing a lot more of them in the future. This happens to be a good time for both of us, and I know it's getting late where you are, Brent, but yeah, it's always good to involve people in the process when we can, and post it. You're getting a sneak peek at an episode that other people will hear in a couple more days. So yeah, that's a good opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks everybody for joining me. These live pods are great because it's just good seeing some reactions to people in real time as well. And obviously, it's not like a traditional stream we do where we can react to every single comment, right. But rest assured that the thoughts that are being put in there, we kind of subconsciously kind of incorporate into our discussion points and hopefully address in a roundabout way, I guess, if you're asking us certain things and that sort of thing. We'll try and do more traditional streams as well, of course. But the live podcast format is definitely something we're having a lot of fun with, and we're going to try continuing going forward.
I gotta see you play another game like Need for Speed The Run that you just remember perfectly in your brain, then you go to play it and you're just like, this isn't the same. Something's off.
Yeah, that was the definition of like, see when you're at a party or something and you're saying to your friends, wow, let's wait till it gets to this part of the song, you're going to fucking love it. And then like for some reason it doesn't hit right, and like that was the only definition of like playing this on stream with you. It was just like, you know what, it's actually like, I like it, but I'm not going to convince Adam here, but yeah. That was like the closest parallel to that for me was the old wait for the drop.
Wait for the drop. Yeah.
Wait for the drop, and it doesn't drop.
I wish we saved that stream.
I always forget Twitch removes them.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. Thanks those of you in the stream for being here, and yeah, you'll see us again soon.
Cheers, guys.